We're at the Connected and Charged conference. We're with Gil Friend, Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Palo Alto. Really, City of Palo Alto is the heart of Silicon Valley, and you're looking at really three things to kind of move this area from where it is today to what's next in terms of mobility and so forth.
Yeah, we really need to take on the mobility question because it brings us multiple challenges. On the one hand, congestion is terrible. Anybody will tell you Bay Area's got the second worst traffic congestion in the United States. And it affects quality of life, affects the abilities of companies to recruit and retain employees. And at the same time, road travel is about almost two-thirds of Palo Alto's carbon footprint. The city's got a commitment to slash that footprint 80% by 2030. We can only do that by transforming transportation, and it's not something we can do by ourselves as a small city in a big metro area. But there are a number of steps we think we can take. One is to do what we can to move vehicle fleets from internal combustion engine, ICE vehicles, to electric vehicles, direct reduction in carbon emissions that way, but that in itself doesn't solve the congestion problem. So that's one piece of the puzzle. Second piece of the puzzle is to rethink the incentives that we put out into the community. Right now, Palo Alto, like many other communities, provides parking for free. Well, and we have a policy to reduce dependence on automobiles. So there's a bit of a disconnect there because we're giving an incentive for people to drive while we're saying, please drive less. So we need to relook at what those incentives are and perhaps look at a model like Stanford University has successfully piloted where they now charge for parking, modest fee, $360 a day for parking, and they use those parking revenues to fund a whole suite of transportation alternative services ranging from buses and shuttles to other services. Stanford has reduced its single occupancy vehicle SOV parking rate from the high 70% to the mid 40%, basically because of that. Even more dramatically, they've saved $107 million in capital expense for parking garages that they don't have to build. And it's not just the money. If you think about a great university, do you want to put your land, this is some of the most valuable land in the world here, do you want to put your land into parking garages or into classrooms and laboratories and libraries and sports facilities and open space? So they've done that. We're looking at that, number two. And then number three is the whole area of mobility as a service. How do you use a variety of emerging technologies, including digital technologies, to make it more convenient for anybody, anywhere, at any time, to not have to get into a car and drive? There'll always be people who will want to drive, who will need to drive, but right now most of us don't have a lot of choices. So how do we expand the choices and move it from owning a car and driving a car being your preferred alternative to being your last resort when nothing else works? So we're looking at all those. There's an ecosystem of providers, companies with applications and services growing up around this idea. It's being advanced to a very strong degree in Helsinki in Finland. We've developed a partnership with the Ministry of Transportation in Finland, as well as with joint venture Silicon Valley here. And really the other thing that we're doing is that we're basically taking advantage of the brand of Palo Alto to convene a conversation in the region and bring together other city governments, county governments, regional transportation agencies, big employers, and mobility providers to talk together about how do we move this game.
And there is, right here, the smartphone has changed everything. We had a little bit of discussion about that, and I think you might have mentioned the idea of transcending different agencies as far as transportation.
Well, about the phone, this is my car. You know, on this I have a bunch of apps that provide me access into ride-sharing services, transit schedules. Some of them are more advanced, what we call mobility aggregation apps that provide multiple services in one app, which I think the direction we're going to go. And this is part of the convenience equation, because if I can have a single app that makes it possible for me to plan, book, ride, and pay for all my transportation needs, my life is way easier. So that's one piece of it. On the agency side, that's another challenge. Transportation planners typically talk about vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, as the critical metric in transportation planning. Well, I think there's a more interesting one, which is transit agencies per million people of population. And the Bay Area's got probably the worst metric in the world. We have, depending on who you talk to, 27 or 37 or 49 different transportation agencies and service providers that we deal with. And so it's very hard to coordinate across that and what a rider wants. I'm a guy who commutes every day on 3 different modes of transportation through 4 political jurisdictions. Well, I don't care about that. What I want is convenience and schedule, an intersection of the schedules in a way that works. I don't want the Caltrain to pull into the BART station intersection 1 minute after the BART train leaves and making me wait for another 20, 30 minutes. All you need to do is just, reconcile those schedules. I say all you need to do. It's a bit complex, but it's the sort of thing computers know how to do. It's route optimization on the one hand and capacity optimization on the other hand. To bring this down to a very personal level, for most of us who own cars, the car is the second largest asset that we own after our homes. And for most of us, the car sits idle 94% of the time. It's a terrible investment if you think about utilization of money and capital for a result. Enormous amounts of steel and rubber and concrete that are idle most of the time, which has an economic impact more than we realize, and has a profound ecological impact in this mode of transportation whose full costs we don't pay. So we need to fix that. As one of my colleagues, Stefan Heck, said on the panel this morning, it's not likely you're going to merge 37 transit agencies into one. And it'd be a thankless task for anybody to take on. But what you might be able to do is get them to play together well and interoperate and share data and have common standards and coordinate schedules and coordinate payment systems, because the net focus is how do we make people's lives easier and how do we make people's lives more convenient. And we have the know-how and the technology and at least the emerging social will to do that, and now we need to find the political will and the political mechanisms to do that.
Well, and speaking of political, you mentioned this, you brought this up about land use, and it seems like that's a huge challenge because the land use and transportation are so closely connected.
They're closely connected, and they tend to be dealt with in government as two separate issues, but they're inseparable. Where you put housing and where you put workplaces engenders transportation demand. And if you put those things near transportation, near transit, you get a very different result than if you do, as we do now in the Bay Area, you put them near highways, far from transportation. So it's just, again, it's not convenient for people to do what they might rather do. And so, the question is, what do you do about that? Palo Alto is in the middle of updating its general plan, and this is very much a subject of conversation, and frankly, a subject of much controversy. Because some of our community wants to build more housing, some of our community does not want to build more housing. Some of our community is saying, what if we could build housing that had no impact on the environment in terms of energy and greenhouse gases and water and had no impact on transportation, which sounds crazy on the one hand, but we have jurisdictions in the Bay Area that have been using things called trip caps as a condition of entitlement, as a condition of permit to build, whether it's a Facebook headquarters or a multi-unit housing development. What if you put on the developer the responsibility to develop the transportation alternatives that are non-single occupancy vehicle? It's a challenge, but if it's a condition of getting your deal done, people will rise to the challenge, as they have done.
Yeah, I think, didn't Dr. Heck bring up an example of a development in San Francisco where Uber got involved to help with the transport?
Uber is working with the Park Merced, a big apartment complex in San Francisco. They're advertising about that. The North Bayshore development in Mountain View has got a 45% trip cap, so the developers are responsible for providing transportation alternatives, and they pay if they fail. Facebook, I believe, pays a $50 a day penalty for every car over their trip cap that comes onto their campus. So it's a question of wiring together the right incentives that make it worthwhile for people to be creative to make a result that ultimately works for everybody.
Excellent. Well, Gil, that's a very good summary of what's going on here. So thank you.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.